right. Hello. We are live. Anybody that joins us as you are coming in, please drop a hello in the chat to let us know you are here. I'm going to turn the chat on my screen so I can see it. All right. How are you, Lindsay?
I'm really well. How are you doing today?
I am good.
Awesome.
While we're waiting for some people to pop in, I will go ahead and say welcome to Tilted Bench. We do this every Wednesday. This is a live show that is a half-hour conversation where we talk about coaching, why it's important, what kind of work it does. Hi, Brooke. How are you? Looks like we've got some folks starting to show up.
Yes.
With me today is Lindsay Parker. Lindsay, thank you again for being here. I'm so glad you said yes. I'm so glad you come on the show with me. Can you start us off by telling us a little bit about what kind of coaching you do and how you got into it?
Absolutely. So the short story of how I got into coaching work in general is I spent 15 or so years in kind of corporate leadership development, talent management roles, which always had an aspect of coaching. But really, what I found in a lot of that corporate work is that the approaches that we were using weren't really that effective. So that kind of led me into what I do now, which is a lot of coaching work with leaders who tend to be overthinkers, who tend to be stuck in their heads. And that can show up in a lot of ways. It can be self-doubt, it can be people pleasing, it can be kind of like controlling behaviors in leadership. And I love working with those folks to help them kind of release their attachment to all of those thoughts that tell them things like, you need to show up this way as a leader. And if you aren't controlling or micromanaging, or if you aren't saying yes to your boss, here's what it means about you as a person. So those are the folks I love to work with, in large part because that used to be me.
I love that you went right into that, because one of the things I always like to ask coaches is, who's your ideal client and why? Right? Because it does seem like a lot of coaches find it easiest and kind of the thing that makes the most sense is to talk to those people who are just a touch behind you on the journey.
Exactly. It's just a nice, I mean, I think there's a certain degree of empathy that comes with that, a real understanding. And there's a familiarity with, not that our journeys are the same, not that the things that worked for Lindsay will necessarily work for others, but certainly there's kind of a recency of being able to look back and say, here's some of the steps that I found helpful. How do we kind of tailor those to where you're at?
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeremiah, glad you're here. Jeremiah loves to talk about leadership. He and Sam Sierra do a show regularly where they talk about it. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be important to them. Hey, Amber. So that, I like that word recency, right? Like it's easier to connect with people if you remember what it feels like. There are people that I've heard say when you're an expert and you're trying to explain something, I mean, even if you're not coaching, that once you kind of get farther along the journey, it becomes more difficult to remember back what it was like at the beginning, right? Do you run into stuff like that with coaching, or are you, let me think about how I want to ask that. I guess, how much time do you spend with your clients figuring out precisely where they are and kind of how much ground needs to be covered?
It definitely depends on the context. I think, I also facilitate a large number of different leadership programs, some of which are like open enrollment, some are very customized to organizations. And I would say in like a program context, there needs to be a little bit more time trying to figure out where people are at, where their starting point is. With coaching, quite honestly, I think people, by the time they find their way to me, they've recognized I'm at the limit of how I'm doing things right now and how I'm seeing the world right now, and I want to look at it differently. Occasionally, an organization will contact me and say, hey, can you coach one of our leaders? And I've definitely had conversations with leaders who are very much, and I don't mean this in a a judgmental way by any means. It's just, they might say things to me like, well, I don't really believe that I have the ability to change. I am who I am. And I might not be the right coach for that person, because I think where I'm going to tend to start versus where they're starting from, we're just maybe a little bit of a mismatch in that way. And I think that's perfectly okay. With coaching, it's so important that anyone finds someone who's, close enough to where they're at, that we're kind of speaking the same language, and there's a nice receptivity to how I might talk about things and how we might approach things together.
Yeah. See, Sam's hopped in. Hi, Sam. And I think I saw Manpreet in there too. Glad you made it too. It's good to see you guys.
Hey, everyone.
So, Lindsay, when we talk about, before we keep going, you guys, Lindsay and I were talking before we got started. We definitely want any questions you have, any comments you have, throw them in there. Lindsay said she is happy to answer anything. We can engage with those. I'll pop them up on the screen. So anything we say that pops something up in your head, share it with us and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So we talked about your clients a little bit, and we're talking about that idea of finding people that you resonate in the right way with. Like, coaching is a very intimate relationship. Like, you need to have clients that click with you for your own sake, and then your clients need to have you click with them. I think that might be a good point to segue into talking about the title of this episode, Bringing Soul and Wisdom to Leadership, because I had kind of one way I phrased this, and then you rephrased it this way. And tell us about this and what this means to you and what it is about what you like to do that connects with the title of the show.
Yeah, I think, leadership is a really interesting thing, because, there's all sorts of definitions of what a leader is. And I've seen a lot of approaches to leadership that are very kind of like tactical. And I'm really coming from a place where, I kind of hold, all of us are soulful, for one. All of us have wisdom. It's just there. It's not something you have to work at. It's not something you have to like develop or build as a skill. It's who we are. And in leadership, it's almost like the more we can just bring forward that soul, that wise voice, the greater the impact that we can have. And some of that other stuff actually gets in the way, because it's a little bit more focused on the idea like who you are at your core is not sufficient. So you need to become better at this myriad of things. And I see how, I know as a leader, I was overwhelmed. I was like, well, there's 15 different skills I'm supposed to get good at. How do I create the time for that? And the approach that I like to bring is more, how do we strip all of this stuff away that's covering over that innate wisdom, like that ego voice, the identification with our thoughts, and just allow our actual self to emerge and to be in the space of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of what I'm hearing there is that it's tricky with all of these, the programs, the certifications, the trainings, just the lingo around leadership and around the things that you need to have and the things that you have to cultivate in yourself, as though you have to grow things that don't exist already. Do you think that does a number on people's confidence levels?
I do. I mean, I think we've been conditioned, not just in leadership, but in life in general, to kind of have this sense that something's always lacking. I mean, if you look at the whole advertising world in general, is built on the idea of like, how do we help people feel like they're missing something and that they need this thing to replace it? And it's, the more that we listen to those messages, we start to really believe like, oh, wow, I don't have what it takes. Like the number of leaders that I talk to in a given week who say things to me like, maybe I'm just not cut out to be a leader. Like, I just don't have what it takes. I'm just not a people person. I'm just not this. I'm just not that. If we actually pause and we start to ask ourselves, where do those stories come from? And, how are they getting in the way of you just being in the world and trusting that you actually have everything that you need to be an outstanding leader?
Hey, Susanna. Susanna's joined us. And I think, that this is Manpreet. Correct me if I'm wrong. Restream sometimes doesn't show us all the names. It's saying LinkedIn user, which is, you are obviously far more than that. But this is a good question, Lindsay. How do you work with clients to figure out what you've got to get rid of and what you need to keep?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's I'm like hesitating because how deep do we go with some of these responses? And I
Go
think
deep.
it's I kind of hold that anything that isn't kind of innately loving and generous and purposeful is our ego voice. So anytime I have, whether it's a thought or an action that is, coming from a place of fear or threat or worry or whatever kind of label we want to put on it, that's not my wisdom. That's not my awareness. Like, awareness is this beautiful, peaceful, loving undercurrent that is just there all the time for us to tap into. And so, if we're not kind of operating from that place of like calm, peaceful lovingness, we're probably operating from ego. And I do it. Like, I don't say that like, oh, Lindsay's perfect. Lindsay never operates from ego. That's what I tend to look for, though, is this kind of innately loving and purposeful?
Right? Because ego can kind of drive us towards fear and towards being caught up on that we have to protect all of these things.
Absolutely.
That at the end of the day, we don't have to protect. Like, they're okay, right?
We really don't. And we can, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that even when I say, the question was like, what do we strip away, right? Is I'm not even trying to help myself or others strip away their ego. Ego is there. That critical voice is going to be there. It's like, how do we accept that voice and just not place our attention on it?
Right. There was something you said in your post this morning, actually, and I wrote it down because I was like, at some point, I'm probably going to want to quote her during the show. And we've reached that point, everybody. So you said, we are already the calm, focused, peaceful version of ourselves that we think we need to become.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't this so much of the struggle that and this is what the past, couple of minutes have been talking about, that we've been conditioned to think you need to become something new, and ego buys into that. Like a lot of the marketing, the sales, even just the rumors and kind of gossip that we pass around feed that ego because it's other people speaking what their egos are telling them, right? And we forget to practice that awareness of what we actually are already.
Yeah. And I think that, when we say that current is always there, the biggest thing that I tend to hear that I've told myself is, yeah, but I don't feel that way, right? Like, I don't feel calm. I don't feel centered. So how can I be that if I don't feel that? And again, like that's why that practice of really examining, witnessing our thoughts and recognizing that they're not us and they don't define who we are. That really helps us see, like, underneath all that talk that says, yeah, but Lindsay, you don't feel peaceful, so you're not peaceful. That's just up here trying to, do its thing. It's trying to convince you that there's more to be done. There's more work you need to do.
Feelings can carry us away, right? Like, I mean, feelings are one of the things I was told years ago about how to deal with feelings is don't fight them. You are who you are. You feel what you feel. That's okay. But your feelings don't have to steer the ship. You acknowledge them and you let them go on.
They will pass.
They will. I want to throw this one up here from Jeremiah. He wants to know about any advice you would give someone who's breaking into starting a coaching business group at an organization.
I so appreciate the question, Jeremiah, and I'll be very honest. Like, I wouldn't say that that's my area of expertise. I have my business. I've pivoted a couple of times, and it's been really interesting for me as I've become clearer in who am I really serving and why. Is that in many respects, I feel like I'm also in that game of like, yes, could you give me some advice? How do I keep expanding my potential for impact, right? I will say that what has been the most successful aspect of building a business for me has continued to be word of mouth. It really has been. I found that almost all of my coaching clients have either been people who have been part of a public workshop that I've offered, or somebody who said, "Oh, my friend so and so worked with you." So I don't know that that's great advice, but I think that word of mouth has been huge for me.
I mean, I'm running the show, you guys, in case you don't know already, to learn more about this myself. So I'm not positioning myself as an expert here, but I have been talking to people about this stuff, and that's the same thing that I'm hearing too. That like word of mouth is an incredibly powerful thing. And Lindsay, I mean, let's sit with this for just a second. With your own start and with your pivots, it seems like sometimes those things have to start kind of small, and they start in a more closely connected place with people you already know who need something, and they know that you can give it to them. Have you found that your pivots, you getting started, work like that, where you have kind of a few people that it just makes sense to work with this in this way, and then you get started and go from there?
Definitely. It's been interesting because, every time I've pivoted or, shifted my focus or my language or whatever, inevitably there's some people who say goodbye. And you would call it in business language, I've lost clients, like organizations who are like, "Ooh, wisdom, soulfulness, that's not our cup of tea," which is totally fine. That's where they're at. And then it's almost like, something else will pop up. It might be smaller, it might be different. So it's not always a one for one, but certainly as I've become clearer in some of my language, it's just interesting to see how, there's little new sprouts. And I think to your point, Nathan, it's like, yeah, you got to cultivate them. They're not full blown trees yet. They're little saplings, but we keep nurturing them. And do I know if they're going to, survive the harsh conditions? I really don't. But I'm willing to continue to nurture those.
Well, and a lot of what starts that process of getting that nurturing is these little points of connection. When you're talking about soul and wisdom, there are people that's going to resonate and with in specific ways. Like I have to put up this comment from Sam over here. Oh, and also stop to say hi to Paul. I saw he's popped in. Sam said this: "Isn't it terrible when our own brains try to sabotage us?" I mean, that type of language, our brain sabotaging us, that's something that for a lot of people, it doesn't click, like that doesn't kind of land well. But then there are others of us, who we hear that and we're like, yes, why does that happen? It's terrible when that happens. And so part of that sabotage can play out in a way, and tell me how you feel about this language, when there's a conflict between the intelligence that we have around how we ought to be, who we ought to be, versus the wisdom of knowing who we already are and the confidence that goes along with that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not sure if this is actually an answer to that. I mean, I think the more we can simply, and as I say this, like I hesitate a lot because I'm conscious that sometimes when we say things like this, or when I say things like this, it comes across as glib, right? Like, oh, all you need to do when your brain throws you what you call a sabotaging thought is recognize, oh, that's just a thought. It's no different than the thought that tells me, Lindsay, you're having a genius moment right now. Like those two things are actually the same. We're focused on content, right? Like, oh, the content of this thought matters. Thought is thought is thought. And the more that we can, look at everything our brain throws our way as just like, it's just stuff. And all of it's going to pass. And that's really what I try to help people work with is how do we not get hung up on this is a sabotaging thought. It shouldn't be there. I ought to be able to ignore it. And all that stuff actually keeps us more stuck than just saying, oh, there it is. I just told myself that I suck at this. Isn't that interesting? And if we can truly view it as interesting and just like, wow, look at the way our brains are just throwing us stuff constantly, and look at it with awe and wonder, it's a really different place to view the world through.
What do you think it is about people in positions of leadership specifically that makes this hard?
Well, most most of the leaders I work with have a pretty strong narrative that a large part of the reason they're in a leadership role is because they're really good at thinking, right? They're good at problem solving. They're good at, taking a bunch of information and analyzing it and making decisions. And all of that may be true, but because of that, they tend to be very strongly identified with their thought. And by that, I mean, it's not just that they have a story like, oh, I'm good at problem solving, I'm good at thinking, and that's what got me here. But they're actually like, but I am my thoughts. And if you take that away from me, what will I be? And that's the thing that is so that can be so hard to break, because there's there can be an intense amount of fear attached to letting go of being the thinker.
Right. Well, and we don't want to challenge our brains. I mean, look at this from Jeremiah. Like, I always ask my brain to show me evidence that the limiting belief is real. Most of the time it can't. I can always prove it wrong. I mean, Jeremiah, this is a great thing to say, because so many of us don't stop to do that. We don't stop to question our brain, right? Especially if you're someone who's very high achieving, very well educated, you've spent all this time training your brain. The idea of not trusting it is very threatening, right?
Yeah. Well, and let's be honest with ourselves. I mean, and compassionate with ourselves, because I suspect, anyone on this call, certainly, I'll only speak for, North American education systems and kind of the general way we've been conditioned is lean into your thinking. Like that, we are taught to listen to our brains, to be analytical, to be logical, to be rational. And so having, someone say, well, yes, your thoughts they're not good nor bad, right? Thinking is a gift. And we don't have to believe everything that we think. It creates this tension within most of us of like, hey, but I've been taught to think. I've been taught that that's how to navigate life.
Yeah. I put this back up from Manpreet from Ram Dass about just saying, so, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Manpreet, because I don't know this as well. But I believe that the point of that is to just have this moment of pause where he's saying, wait a second and think about that. Is it really true? This is something that you find in a lot of the great philosophical traditions of the world, is that you need to stop and ask the questions.
Yeah. Well, and it's, for anyone who's looking to really like explore this idea of like, how do I break the attachment with my thoughts? There's a million great texts out there. I find a really nice entry point. Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul, is just a lovely exploration of the idea that you are not the thinker, you are not the thought, you are the one witnessing the thought. And if we kind of look at it as a practice, it's kind of just sitting back, and it's, what we would typically think of in meditation teaching is like our thoughts are the clouds passing and we are the sky. And that's all that those practices and those texts are built around, is helping us, again, it's that steady undercurrent of awareness. That is who we are. And the thought is a layer above that. And we're just witnessing all of it.
And there we go. Thanks, Manpreet, for adding that.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is like, and then that's perfect with what you were just saying, Lindsay. Like, I think some of that for a lot of us can be about control, right? If you see the cloud and you see what shape it is, that's very easy to explain and to latch onto, versus spending more time with the kind of vastness of the sky. And that works with yourself too. Like, you are infinitely capable, well, at least pretty close. So you have a lot of capability, you have a lot of options, opportunities. There are ambiguities and tensions within yourself, and all of that stuff is part of who you are. And sitting with that and accepting it is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yes.
Awe and wonder. I think these are important things. This is about also that thing of what clients may or may not connect with, right? Like, awe and wonder are things that can sound woo-woo, right? As people like to say. So people don't know how to connect with that. But
yeah,
Like that's part of being human, to have these experiences where something is beyond you or something is you in a profound way that you need to reconnect with.
I think we can lose that. Not all of us do, right? But I mean, think about how many times in your day do we sit back and think like, wow, I was genuinely awed by that. And I know that there have been times in my life where if you asked me that question, I'd be like, I don't remember the last time I felt awe. So learning, it's not even learning, it's kind of like remembering how to go out into the world and to be amazed by our own mind, to be amazed by what we see out there. I mean, it's part of the reason I sometimes take people off into the woods and just like, look at what's around you. Look at how this all intricately functions together, or just its beauty in and of itself, and connect with that sense of awe and wonder that some of us have truly lost touch with.
Yeah, I mean, that's all right. Let's schedule a separate show to
I
just
know.
talk about that. My wife and I have this conversation very often about, people being outside, just, I mean, even just sitting out in your yard, right? And like feeling the breeze, feeling the sunshine, taking off your shoes, getting the grass under your feet, the dirt, the gravel, the whatever,
Yeah.
depending on how tenderfooted you are, if we're inside and we're, connected to our devices and our thises and that's, like, you could start to feel disconnected, because like as great as a lot of entertainment is, it's not the same as sitting under the face of the starlit sky and realizing that you are part of something so much bigger. And those moments really invite you to expand yourself and then also to go inward, and that's good work.
Absolutely.
Well, Lindsay, we are getting near the end of time. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Wow, there's some great comments going through. I'm going to scroll back through them later and have a look too. Nadine, hi. And I didn't miss saying hi to Ashley earlier too. Glad you guys are here. Lindsay, tell us, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What do you prefer for people to reach out to you?
Well, since we're, sharing this on LinkedIn, I mean, I'm just a message away. I welcome you, even if you just say hi, right? You may not want anything to do with coaching. That's fine. I love connecting with people. I mean, Nathan, you and I connected just by starting to exchange comments and then saying hello. So
and here we are now.
I'm here. So send me a message. I'd love to chat with you.
Awesome. And the last thing that I've been asking guests to do is to share some nugget of wisdom, some final thoughts, something that you really want all of us to take with us after this conversation. For this, I'm gonna let you have the whole screen all to yourself, and you can lay it on us.
I mean, the biggest thing that it really is underlying all the work that I do is I want anyone who's listening to this right now, I just want you to take a moment and really, settle into your wisdom and to trust that whether you feel wise right now or ever, that you are wise and you have everything that you need already. You are lacking nothing. And that's really, if you can sit with that, find a pocket of stillness and absorb that sentiment, that's all I want to leave you with.
That's a pretty good place to stop. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Next week, Gretchen Skalka is going to be with me. It's going to be a good time. I hope we see you then.
All right.